To someone who's only watched my 3 previous reviews this year, it seems I just analyzed Disney films. With their nearly 30 upcoming sequels and remakes, the temptation to point out the lack of novelty is hard to ignore, and it's time someone addresses the elephant in the room. No, I'm not referring to the Dumbo reboots either. I'm talking about Frozen 2 being a letdown. Now, at this point, you've either closed this video due to my indignation, or you're scratching your head in befuddlement. How can I say Frozen 2 will be a disappointment? You're probably thinking. It's a follow-up to the most successful animated film of all time. That, viewers, is precisely the reason. Frozen's all-encompassing reign was an undeniable example of lightning in a bottle. Like a pathogen in a warm environment, the fervor focusing on Elsa, Anna, and all happenings in Arendelle spread far and wide to nearly every corner of the globe. And before we knew it, the multitude was singing the film's songs, wearing the costumes, buying every bit of merchandise, and naming their children and pets after the characters. The specific reason behind the frenzy was nothing short of a perplexity. Why had Frozen attracted such accolades? Some people said it was because of the strong female characters, but we've seen those from Disney before. Some said it was because it parodied and subverted earlier Disney films, but we'd seen that before too. Some said it was the songs and animation, but again, those are nothing new. Maybe, just maybe, the secret to its success is the pair of princesses, or in this case, a princess and a queen, meaning double the merchandise. In all seriousness, though, Frozen's performance is a happily ever after that took almost 80 years to realize. Loosely based on Hans Christian Andersen's 1844 fairy tale, The Snow Queen, the story tells of the young girl Gerda, who leaves home on a journey to save her best friend, Kay, who has holed himself up in the Snow Queen's castle. During her excursion, she makes new friends, including a magical elderly woman, 2 crows, a prince and princess, a robber girl, and a reindeer. Gerda convinces Kay to return home, and all turns out well. From early on, Walt Disney wanted to adapt the story into an animated feature, but the largest hurdle he found was with the Queen herself. Aside from her physical description, not much is said about her in the tale, and the studio had difficulties in making her a 3-dimensional character. As early as 1937, before Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs was released, Walt began discussing plans for a feature-length film showcasing Andersen's most famous stories, and in March 1940, he and Samuel Goldwyn of MGM talked about co-producing a film in which MGM would shoot the live-action segments showing Andersen's life, and Disney would animate the fairy tales. The project never left the drawing board, though, because Disney's focus shifted to military cartoons when America entered World War II. Throughout the years, the company kept eyeing the potential of the Snow Queen, but they continually hit the same roadblocks. Another Andersen tale, The Little Mermaid, marked the dawn of the Disney Renaissance, and it gave Disney Company the confidence to try bringing the Snow Queen to life in the late 1990s. The proposed version, developed by Glenn Keane, would combine traditional animation with 3D elements. In June 2003, then Disney CEO Michael Eisner met with the animation department to discuss the slate of upcoming animated films, and he was extremely interested in the idea pitch. The Queen would freeze suitors who attempted to thaw her stone-cold heart, but one particular suitor finally thawed her. It was suggested by Eisner that the project should go to Pixar instead. Again, the production hit an impasse, and Glenn Keane stepped down to work on Tangled instead. In 2006, Disney announced that music composer and Disney Renaissance veteran Alan Menken began developing music for the Snow Queen, but like before, production faltered. During September 2008, Chris Buck, who co-directed Tarzan, pitched yet another Snow Queen idea to John Lasseter. Buck said he wanted to show a different definition of true love other than romance. The story was renamed Anna and the Snow Queen and would be traditionally animated. The queen would be the villain, but would get a redemption at the end. All went well until it hit another delay in 2010. After Tangled was released to critical acclaim in 2011, Disney decided to change the working title of Anna and the Snow Queen to Frozen, as they felt Tangled's success was due in part to the genderless title, and including Anna and Queen would discourage boys from seeing it. Production started up again with renewed vigor in wake of Tangled. Alan Menken's songs were scrapped in favor of numbers by Bobby Lopez and his wife Kristen, who had penned the music for Avenue Q, The Book of Mormon, and 2011's Winnie the Pooh, respectively. It was also revealed that the film would be entirely CGI. Jennifer Lee joined as screenwriter in March 2012, giving the filmmakers just 18 months to complete the movie. At that point in production, Elsa was still the villain, and the filmmakers strove to make her relatable to audiences. During a production team meeting, it was suggested to make Anna the younger sibling of the queen. Early screenplays had Elsa kidnapping Anna on her wedding day to freeze her heart, and Hans trying to save her with a kiss, but that concept was dropped. Elsa's role as villain was abandoned when the Lopezes presented the song Let It Go. The ballad unmasked Elsa as not an antagonist, but someone who's been living in fear and is coming to terms with her powers. Lee rewrote the screenplay around the song's premise, and Hans was retooled to fill the villain's shoes. As late as June 2013, the story was still being redrafted. Test screenings that month produced positive reaction from viewers. The studio was hesitant to advertise the tuneful flick as a musical because they believed it would turn off audiences. I don't know why they thought that. After all, with the exception of Brave, all the films in their princess line are musicals, and those are the biggest money makers of all Disney animated movies. Even the massive Lion King was a musical. Frozen opened on November 27, 2013, and broke the Thanksgiving 3-day weekend record with $67 million in domestic earnings. At once, the world was ensnared in Frozen's hypnotic grip, and people began measuring past Disney animated films against Frozen's alleged clever twists and tropes. Hailed by many as progressive, the movie borrows elements from other Disney titles and mocks tropes only seen in a handful of Disney movies. Here are some examples. Only 4 Disney women fell in love at first sight prior to Anna: Snow White, Cinderella, Aurora, and Ariel. As for Elsa chastising Anna about marrying someone she's just met, Roger told Giselle that in 2007's Enchanted, 6 years before, and that movie also showed the true love twist ending. And speaking of true love's kiss, that was only in Snow White and Sleeping Beauty. Even Naveen's frog curse was broken by the kiss of a princess, not true love. Although Disney claimed to eschew from a romance by making Hans evil, they still had Anna fall in love with Kristoff, whom she's only known for about 1 day. Why did the movie poke fun at Anna's desire to marry a prince, yet allowed her to fall in love with a man she's known only for a bit more than 24 hours? Oh wait, because the same thing happened in Enchanted, but it was over a few days at least. Regardless of these points, the $150 million animated film took in $1.3 billion at the box office, becoming the highest-grossing animated flick before price adjustment. Snow White made $67 million domestically in 1937, and that's equivalent to $1,120 million now, and it sold more than twice as many tickets as Frozen. Frozen also went on to earn the title of best-selling Blu-ray ever in the US. Naturally, Disney saw this as a golden opportunity at a cash grab and decided to start on a Frozen short called Frozen Fever in April 2014, which would precede the live-action Cinderella. Even more drastic, Disney shuttered the 26-year-old Norway Pavilion ride, Maelstrom, to rework it into Frozen Ever After, much to fans of the culture-rich ride's protest. Interestingly enough, in 2002, the country of Norway stopped funding its Epcot Pavilion, and Disney was left to foot the bill for maintenance and updates. It was also shortly after that when Michael Eisner began talking to the animation department about the Snow Queen movie. Had Norway neglecting its financial obligations at Epcot been the reason Disney decided to focus on the Norwegian-themed Snow Queen film, just so it could start turning a profit on the pavilion that was draining their funds? Considering that the pavilion has been princess-centric since Norway stopped paying, what with turning the restaurant Akershus into a princess meet and greet, it seems very feasible. On March 12, 2015, a sequel to Frozen was announced by CEO Bob Iger, John Lasseter, and Josh Gad during Disney's shareholder meeting. A renewed fever pitch hits like a shockwave, and Frozen's merciless grip only tightens. A short and a sequel to Disney's most popular film in the last 19 years? What could possibly go wrong? When Frozen Fever came to the theaters, though, the reception wasn't as warm as it had been for Frozen, no pun intended. The 7-minute short was stuffed with continuity nods to the original and centered around Elsa showering Anna with birthday gifts in bland bourgeois fashion. The short brought nothing new to deepen what complexities the characters had, and was sugary fan service, simply acting as a commercial to push the new costumes and introducing the Snowgies as more toys to eat adults' wallets. A gripe I personally had was when Elsa sang that Anna had never had a real birthday, except for when the younger would wait outside her bedroom door. So you're telling me Anna never had a party before the accident, and the parents never threw a party for her during the 10 years after? Please. Kristen Bell and Idina Menzel will reprise their roles as the sisters, and Jennifer Lee and Chris Buck will return as co-directors. There's no word on the story, but no doubt it'll contain callback references, new costumes, and jokes related to the first movie and Frozen Fever. Maybe we'll learn about the origins of Elsa's powers, which may be a curse from some snow demon. The monster will kidnap Elsa, and Anna and Kristoff will put off their wedding to save the day. So that brings us back to the crux of why I said Frozen 2 won't stand anywhere near Frozen's quality. Catching lightning in a bottle twice is near impossible. Even though the original Frozen did borrow tropes and ultimately fell victim to what it attempted to subvert, fate smiled upon it, and it became the most popular animated film we've seen since The Lion King. The perfect alignment of the planets took about 80 years to happen for Frozen, and we won't see another animated movie grab audiences so ferociously as it did for a while. Disney won't have as much incentive to make the sequel outstanding because they feel brand recognition will sell the movie alone. Frozen Fever, though, shows what happens when quality is sacrificed for quick turnaround, and the sequel will no doubt suffer the same dilemma. People had high hopes for the shorts, but it fell flat and earns nearly $1 billion less than the first. For all of Frozen's flaws, Disney at least put in noticeable time and effort to the story. Frozen 2 will simply be an extended Frozen Fever, in that we'll see cameos, callbacks, and the sisters living in blissful harmony in a futile attempt to recapture the magnetism of the first. Will people want to see this? Of course, it's the Frozen sequel, but probably not as many as before. The people who return for Frozen 2 will primarily consist of hardcore fans of the original. Many folks became fatigued by the overplayed songs, mountains of merchandise, and the overpowering presence of the film everywhere. They'll approach the new movie with caution, just like many did with Frozen Fever, which resulted in the short earning $757 million less than the original, even though it was out during the peak of Frozen's post-theater popularity. What will critics think about it? The film will have good moments, but it won't score as high as the first. Critics and audiences may groan at the jokes and themes that worked before in the first movie, but feel like overused gags here. Was it a good idea to make this movie? Like Avatar 2, the sequel is being released years after the original. Frozen 2 will make a lot of money, but it would have performed even better had it been released in Frozen Fever's place. With Disney's release roster filled between now and summer 2020, the movie may see a November 2020 opening. Kids who were 5 when the first came out will be 12 by the time the sequel comes around, and most will have new animated preferences. Adults who were fans also may find other movies to replace Frozen as their favorite due to the long absence. Even though Disney is keeping Frozen's presence out there with stage performances, musicals, parades, attractions, merchandise, and film Easter eggs, it's coming across as desperate, and the publicity is turning into scourge. The fact that there were protests and petitions against closing the Maelstrom ride for a rethemed Frozen attraction shows the magic is melting, and Disney is doing anything to increase its sell-by dates to justify a sequel. What will be the lasting impression? Sequels are made with the desire to improve on the original, whether it means expanding the story's universe, expounding on the characters, or presenting a tale with higher stakes. Frozen Fever was essentially a mini-sequel, and Disney had total confidence in its success. Josh Gad, the voice actor of Olaf, even made an apology to parents that their children would be singing Frozen Fever's Making Today a Perfect Day repeatedly as they had Let It Go, insinuating the former song would be as catchy as the power ballad. As history shows, though, Making Today a Perfect Day did not catch on. Disney has never mastered sequels that are as iconic as the originals. Even 1990's The Rescuers Down Under, the only true sequel made by Walt Disney Animation Studios and not the direct-to-video sequel studio Disney Toons, while lavishly animated, was plagued with a forgettable story, causing it to underperform at the box office and becoming the least successful film of the Disney Renaissance. Frozen 2 won't come close to the original's popularity and staying power, not only due to being released years later, but also because it'll be a familiar retread with just a few new aspects. Part of the original's draw was the professed innovative plot and twist. Frozen Fever had nothing more to say about the sisters, and brought back old jokes to ingratiate itself, and 2 will probably do the same, because it's safe territory. Yet, as we saw with Frozen Fever, many people were disappointed due to the redundancy. Despite how much blood, sweat, and tears Disney puts into Frozen 2, it will still always live in the original shadow. Instead of making blatant cash grabs of previous winners, Disney needs to focus on making new franchises to expand their line and bring more characters to life. They did it in the past, they could do it again. Oh, wait. This is the company that's promising at least 28 sequels and live-action remakes in the next few years. Please don't let the next pre-review be a Disney film. Oh, okay. Someone's got a gripe about it, and that someone is Marplotic.